Okay, imagine that every single plant on Earth just disappeared. It sounds like a fun superpower to have for a day, being able to walk into any forest and not have to worry about getting poisoned by poisonous plants or scratched by thorny ones. But it turns out this would be a pretty bad thing. First off, all of the oxygen we breathe in would vanish. Here's why. As plants photosynthesize, they absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and then use sunlight to convert that carbon dioxide into energy for the plant itself. And as part of this process, they emit oxygen back into the atmosphere. In fact, more than half of the oxygen we humans need to live is produced by phytoplankton living in our oceans, while the rest comes from land plants. Without them, we wouldn't survive very long. The air we breathe would be filled with carbon dioxide and other gases that plants normally scrub out of the air, like sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and ozone. We might be able to get away with this for a few days, but eventually the air we breathe would become so toxic that we couldn't survive. So first things first, we die, but let's say for some bizarre reason that we were able to survive without oxygen. What else would happen if plants suddenly vanished? People would starve to death. For one, around 20% of the calories people eat come from plants directly in the form of fruits, vegetables, and nuts. If all the plants disappeared, people who didn't stock up on canned or dried goods before the Great Famine of 2020 would die of starvation within weeks. But even those who did stockpile food wouldn't survive forever because those foods contain a finite amount of nutrients. Canned peaches might taste delicious after months of eating beans and rice, but they can't provide the vitamins and minerals your body needs to stay healthy. You'll slowly develop vitamin deficiencies and eventually die. It would also be impossible to grow new food because farms rely on pollinators like bees and butterflies to pollinate crops. And without plants, these animals would have nothing to collect nectar from or lay their eggs in. Plus, many crops are actually made up of multiple plants. Cotton, for example, is made from the cotton plant. Corn chips come from corn. And without the plants themselves, there would be nothing left to harvest. Ranches would be no different. Cattle, sheep, and other animals raised for meat and leather rely on grasses and other vegetation to survive. Without plants, these animals would starve, meaning that raising them would be pointless. Those animals that do eat meat would quickly run out of prey since most animals depend on plants either directly or indirectly. Without new life growing on the planet, existing herds and flocks would eventually dwindle to nothing. Hunting wild animals would also be pointless since they, too, would starve. If somehow we managed to survive all of this, we'd find that water was now undrinkable. Plants absorb water through their roots and then release it into the atmosphere through a process called transpiration. Without plants, the water cycle would slow dramatically. Rain would fall less frequently, and when it did, it would pool on the ground instead of being whisked away into the atmosphere. And without oxygen in the atmosphere, it would be hard to keep water clean. Water treatment facilities would still function for a while since they store treated water in giant reservoirs. But after those reservoirs ran dry, we'd be left with nothing but salty ocean water. Even the oceans would eventually turn to salt water since the phytoplankton living in the sea would die off. And without plants removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, the ocean would become a giant carbon sink instead of releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. This would speed up the process of ocean acidification, which would kill off even more marine life. The soil would also quickly degrade. Plants help hold soil in place with their roots. Without them, rocks and dirt would simply wash away during rainstorms. All of the nutrients in the soil would also eventually leach away into groundwater, leaving behind nothing but dust. Deserts would expand, fertile farmland would turn to dust bowls, and entire mountain ranges would turn into tumbleweeds. Eventually, Earth would resemble Mars more than anything else. Even the climate would change. Plants reflect sunlight back into space, which helps regulate the Earth's temperature. Without them, Earth would become a scorching hot desert wasteland where no life could survive. In short, all life as we know it would cease to exist. But what if plants didn't disappear entirely, but instead just stopped producing oxygen for a week? First, we have to deal with all the oxygen-deprived animals dying, including pets, livestock, and any wild animals that didn't seek shelter underground. But humans would probably fare a little better than those animals thanks to the development of pure oxygen masks and breathing apparatus used by deep-sea divers. We might even be able to survive if we took enough precautions. But the world around us would look vastly different. For starters, all the leaves on trees would turn brown and crispy. Lawns and farm fields would turn into brittle straw, and forests would look like they'd been scorched by wildfire. Lakes and rivers would be eerily still since it would be hard for fish and other aquatic animals to move around with so little oxygen in the water. On a clear night, we'd be able to see twice as many stars as normal because there'd be less atmospheric pollution. And sunrise and sunset would appear extra colorful due to the lack of oxygen in the sky. Animals that could sense the impending disaster would flee to deeper waters or burrows where more oxygen remained. Others would retreat to areas with lots of trees like forests or even parks. Humans would do the same, crowding into cities and wearing gas masks. The streets would smell like exhaust fumes since cars would burn more fuel while idling due to the lack of oxygen in the air. Planes would be grounded and rockets unable to launch since combustion requires oxygen. With all this congestion, hospitals would be overrun with patients suffering from respiratory problems. First responders would struggle to save people who panicked and tried to flee to safer environments only to suffocate along the way. People with jobs that required physical labor would struggle to work in such thin air. Athletes would collapse mid-game and construction sites would grind to a halt. Schools would close and parents would rush to pick their kids up before they had a chance to suffocate. Some people might try to save money by taking public transportation, but would end up trapped in gridlock as everyone else did the same. Cars would sit bumper to bumper belching out exhaust fumes into the air. Even if you avoided all that, you wouldn't be able to enjoy your trip. Most hotels and restaurants wouldn't have enough oxygen for guests to breathe, so vacations would be out of the question. Movie theaters would close and TV, film and music production would grind to a halt. Zoos and aquariums would struggle to keep their animals alive. Some animals would panic and trample guests trying to escape their enclosures. Others would simply lie down and wait to die. People would be forced to make some tough decisions. Should they stay in the safety of their homes or venture out into the oxygen-starved world? How long could they really last without oxygen? Would they spend their last moments watching Netflix or playing video games? Would they take one last vacation or perhaps visit a loved one they haven't seen in a while? These are the kinds of questions that would be on everyone's mind. And once the week was over, things wouldn't be the same. The economy would collapse and global trade would cease to exist. Famines and wars would likely break out as countries scrambled to secure the resources they needed to survive. There would be no going back. The world would never be the same. So yeah, maybe having all the plants in the world disappear for just a week wouldn't be that fun after all. But what about the opposite scenario? What if new plants just kept growing indefinitely? Watch this video to find out.